Before we begin, if you enjoy dark science fantasy, immersive world building, and narrated stories, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps support the series and ensures you don't miss the next chapter of Empire of Ash and Seamlight. You are listening to Empire of Ash and Seamlight, Book 1, Echoes of Eternal, written by Jerry Buford. Chapter 1. The Girl in the Arches. The city did not wake gently. Eternal never did. It gathered itself by degrees, as though some vast engine buried beneath its foundations had begun another laborious turn in the dark. The first sound was always the low iron groan of pressure gates unlocking through the lower districts. Then came the hydraulic cough of lifts rising through the spinal shafts of the spires, followed by the long, sonorous toll of the atmosphere organs set high in the eastern towers. That sound did not ring so much as descend. It poured down over the city in a slow, metallic peal, draping itself across glass bridges, shrine balconies, and obsidian causeways until every tier of Eternal seemed to hum in answer. Below, the low wards smoked. Steam spilled from grated vents in pale, twisting veils. Condensation clung to the ironwork in trembling beads. Lines of laborers moved beneath vaulted walkways ribbed with ancient support struts, their silhouettes reduced to dark smears by distance and mist. Above them, the upper city rose in impossible layers, buttressed towers of black stone and silver-veined glass. Flying causeways stretched between high bastions. Cathedral engines mounted into the bones of the architecture itself. Nothing in Eternal had been built merely to stand. Everything had been designed to endure pressure. And at the edge of a high maintenance arch, far above the waking crowds, Evangeline ran. She moved like she belonged to the height, not recklessly, not quite, but with the kind of intimate confidence that came only from long familiarity with danger. Her boots struck the narrow iron span with quick, measured rhythm. One hand skimmed the cold flank of a support rib as she vaulted a gap where part of the walkway had sheared away decades before. Her long coat snapped behind her in the high wind, a dark line cut against the silver haze. Copper hair, unbound despite every instruction ever given to her, streamed loose over one shoulder and flashed like fresh-drawn wire in the morning pallor. She did not look down. Looking down made the scale of Eternal too obvious, and scale in this city was always a kind of insult. It reminded you of how small you were. How little any one body mattered against the stacked enormity of stone, steel, and state. Evangeline had no patience for being reminded of that. Behind her, iron-shod footsteps rang out across the arch.
"Lady Evangeline!"
The shout came sharp through the wind, edged with discipline and irritation in equal measure. She grinned. The expression altered her whole face. It took the solemn beauty others always remarked upon and split it open with warmth and danger. She had her father's severity only when still. In motion, she belonged to no one's image of obedience.
"You'll have to do better than that,"
she called back without turning. She cleared another break in the causeway, landed light on the balls of her feet, and ducked beneath a descending conduit slick with condensation. The pipe exhaled a breath of hot mineral steam across her cheek. It smelled of ozone, wet iron, and the deep alchemical heat harvested from beneath the city's roots. Eternal smelled best when it was half awake, when the machine breath of it still overpowered the perfumes and incense of the upper courts. The footsteps behind her multiplied. Of course, they had sent more than one. They were not common guards either. She could hear the difference. Common guards chased with noise and panic. These moved in disciplined cadence, boots striking metal with the impersonal certainty of trained men who had already calculated every probable route ahead of her. Praetorian adjutants, then, or palace wardens. Perhaps both. Her smile sharpened. Good. A chase without competence on the other side was hardly worth the trouble. The maintenance arch curved outward around the flank of a minor tower, opening suddenly onto a gulf of open air. Here the city fell away in plunging strata, market terraces below, smoke wells beneath those, and lower still the dim furnace throats of industrial precincts glowing with a bruised orange pulse. Far beyond all of it, on the horizon line, the greater spires of Eternal climbed into the pale ash light like blackened lances thrust against heaven. For a single heartbeat, the sight struck her still, not with awe, not exactly, with recognition. This city was a cage, yes, but it was also a body, vast, armored, layered in ritual and pressure and old authority. Sometimes, in moments like this, balanced on an iron rib with the wind clawing at her coat, she could almost believe Eternal was not built upon the dead bones of a ruined world, but upon something sleeping, something listening from under the stone. Then the sensation came. It was small at first, a shiver, not in the flesh, but under it. Evangeline faltered half a step. The iron under her boots had gone cold. Not surface cold, not wind cold, a deeper thing, a cold that seemed to rise up through the arch from somewhere impossibly far below, as though the bedrock itself had inhaled. The humming machinery of the city wavered in her hearing. The morning toll faded. Even the wind seemed briefly drawn thin. She stopped. Behind her, the pursuing footsteps slowed. Ahead of her, the arch stretched on into drifting silver mist, empty except for pipes, chains, and the distant geometry of the next connecting span. Yet something in the air had altered. Evangeline lifted her head. There was no figure, no movement, nothing to see. But she felt, no, not felt, knew, attention. A pressure too large to be human, too vast to belong to any single watching mind. It did not descend upon her like threat. It touched the world around her with the blind, measuring patience of something testing the edges of a structure. The sensation moved through the air, through the iron, through the city's humming bones, until it reached her and paused. Not on the arch, on her. Her breath caught. For one impossible instant, the gulf below seemed to lean inward. The towers of Eternal, the steam, the smoke, the suspended bridges, the very scale of the city itself, all of it bent around a silence she could not name. It was as if something buried beyond sight had noticed a single living thread in the pattern above and had drawn close enough to examine it. Evangeline's hand tightened around the support rib beside her. The metal vibrated. A bolt lodged in the ironwork near her shoulder gave a small, abrupt click. Then the moment passed. Sound returned all at once, the grind of turbines, the hiss of steam, the cry of some distant signal horn, the pounding approach of armed men. The world snapped back into its old proportions, so violently it almost made her stagger. She forced herself upright before the weakness could show.
Lady Evangeline!
One of the men shouted again, nearer now.
Stand down!
She turned at last. 3 figures had emerged from the mist behind her, advancing in controlled formation along the narrow span. They were clad in dark, plated harness over ceremonial underlayers, not in full war plate but in enough armor to make a point. Shock batons hung at their hips. The foremost officer had already removed his helm, either out of respect or exasperation, probably both.
You want me to stand down?
Evangeline said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt.
That suggests I have risen in rebellion, which seems flattering.
Your absence was noted.
Then, your surveillance is improving.
The officer did not smile. Sensible man.
My lady, the Marshal has ordered your immediate return.
At that, something in her expression changed. Not fear, not submission, but attention of a different sort.
Varric?
She asked.
Yes.
That mattered. Marshal Varric did not dispatch pursuit teams over nothing. If he had sent palace-trained men into the maintenance arches to retrieve her personally, then whatever waited below was not another lecture on protocol, not another correction from court tutors, not another carefully veiled political summons from one house or the other. Something had happened. Evangeline glanced once more toward the city beyond the arch. The strange cold had vanished, but not entirely. Some residue of it remained under her skin, thin as frost and just as difficult to hold. The sensation had not felt like imagination. It had felt like recognition without language. She hated that. She hated it most because some hidden part of her had wanted to lean toward it. The officer took one cautious step forward.
My lady.
She exhaled once through her nose, then spread her hands in theatrical surrender.
Very well,
she said.
You have caught me in my campaign against boredom. I yield.
None of them relaxed. Wise again. She crossed the span toward them at an easy pace, though inwardly she was already moving elsewhere, back over that strange instant, that impossible pressure, that cold through the iron. By the time she reached the foremost officer, her face had become composed once more, all sharp grace and unreadable calm. Only her eyes betrayed anything. Their green had darkened.
Where is he?
She asked.
The lower transit court. He requested haste.
Evangeline nodded once. As the three wardens fell into escort around her, the city seemed to close over the moment on the arch as though it had never happened. Steam drifted, bells rang, machinery labored. Eternal resumed being eternal, vast, grim, magnificent, and entirely unwilling to explain itself. But as she descended with her escorts through the iron arteries of the waking city, Evangeline could not shake the sensation that something far below had turned in its sleep. And that, for one breathless instant, it had looked up and found her there. Kalen in the light sink. The city was only a wound on the horizon. From the flats of the lower reach, Eternal no longer looked like a capital of mankind or a throne of surviving order. It looked like a jagged obsidian tooth driven into the skin of the world by some ancient act of violence. Its upper spires caught what little light remained and held it in cold, bloodless lines. Out here, that distant geometry meant nothing. There was no warmth in it, no salvation, only distance. Kalen spat into the dust. The phlegm hit the ground dark, thick, and metallic. Everything tasted of ore out here. Ore, ash, and the slow poison of a world that had never forgiven the living for enduring upon it. He shifted the strap of his kinetic rifle higher across his shoulder and scanned the flats again, eyes narrowed against the bruised evening glare. The land around the dig was wrong in the old way. Not ruined, wrong. Great fossilized rib arches broke from the crust in long curves of black stone, half buried in salt and silver dust, like the exposed bones of some planetary leviathan. The trench the professor had ordered cut between them was narrow and ugly, biting down through petrified layers that looked less geological the longer a man stared at them. The ground here folded in ridges and striations that resembled compressed muscle more than rock. Every gust of wind carried glittering particulate across the flats, and every step released the dry whisper of ground, worn down from ages of pressure and dead heat. A few yards below him, crouched inside the trench in a heavy enviro cloak streaked with dust, Professor Halvek dragged a gloved hand across the exposed vein in the earth as reverently as a priest touching scripture.
"It's not a random formation,"
the old man muttered, not for the first time.
"Look at the branching. Look at the density change between the outer layers. This isn't sedimentary patterning. It's organized."
Kalen didn't bother looking down.
Everything becomes organized if you stare at it long enough, Professor.
Halvek gave a low, irritated sound.
That is the thinking of soldiers.
That is the thinking of men who like surviving until morning.
The professor rose a little higher in the trench, goggles clouded with grime, face lit by that same academic fever Kalen had been learning to distrust since the contract began.
"You're not listening. This is vascular."
That got a glance. Kalen looked down into the trench at the dark line running through the exposed bedrock. It had an ugly kind of coherence to it, that much was true. The vein was not bright, but it held heat strangely, as though light entered it and forgot how to leave. The striations around it spread in branching channels, thin as capillaries in some places, thick as tendons in others. It looked less like something buried than something interrupted. Kalen's jaw tightened. He still did not like the word.
"Stone doesn't have veins,"
he said, grimacing as he looked.
"No."
Halvek replied softly, eyes wide behind the goggles.
But bodies do.
The wind shifted. Kalen turned away from the trench and swept the horizon again. This was why he had come up out of the lower tiers in the first place. Not for glory, not for scholarship, and certainly not for revelation. The professor could tell himself they were uncovering truth if it made the work feel grander. Kalen was here because somebody needed to keep the old fool alive long enough to get paid, and because the world beyond the city walls remained full of things that preferred a distracted man. The sun had already dipped behind the broken western shelf. What remained of daylight was flattening into a murky violet dimness. Shadows lengthened between the rib formations. The temperature had begun its familiar fall. Light sink. Kalen hated light sink. It was the half hour when the world seemed to exhale all at once. Atmospheric pressure dipped. Surface warmth bled out of the ground. Sound changed. Smells carried farther. Predators moved. The wastes did not belong to men at that hour. They merely tolerated them poorly. He thumbed the rifle's safety, then clicked it off. The blue charge cell answered with a quiet, angry hum.
5 minutes,
he said. Below him, Halvek froze.
I'm close.
You're always close.
This time I mean it.
Kalen's eyes remained on the perimeter.
That has also always been true.
The professor made another vexed sound and bent to the trench again, chipping loose a small shard from the exposed vein with maddening care. Kalen let him work. Arguing with Halvek once he reached this state was like trying to talk a fever down by reason. The wind came again, harder now. It carried the scent of ozone, and beneath it, something fouler, a rot-sour, mineral stink with wetness under it. Not carrion, not exactly. Something alive that fed too long in bad places. Kalen's shoulders stiffened. He lowered the goggles over his eyes. The thermal display struggled for a moment through static and drifting dust, then resolved into a grainy wash of red and black across the flats ahead. Fossil ribs, broken crust, residual heat pockets in the trench wall. Then movement, large, low, fast in the wrong way. Behind the farthest rib arc, a heat signature slid across the display with a twitching, liquid irregularity that had nothing human in it. It paused, then moved again, angling toward the trench. Kalen's grip tightened on the rifle.
Pack it up,
he said. No response. He did not take his eyes off the display.
Professor, now!
I need another minute.
Kalen's voice dropped lower.
No, you need to stand up and move.
Halvek straightened at last, clutching the newly freed shard in both hands. Even through the goggles, Kalen could see the pale avidity in his expression.
Do you have any idea what this implies?
Yes,
Kalen said.
That you are about to die holding it.
The thing crested the ridge. It came over not like a sprinting beast, but like something poured from behind the stone and hastily taught to run. Its flesh was a pale, translucent gray stretched tight between plates of obsidian carapace. Too many limbs struck the ground in ugly sequence. Each ended in hooked claws tipped with metallic growths that flashed in the failing light like wet ore. The head was wedge-shaped and low, jawlines layered, sensory pits opening and constricting along the front in a wet, clicking pattern. A slag stalker, not rare, not legendary, just lethal. The kind of old-world predator that learned to eat whatever still moved and had survived long enough to become part scavenger, part machine reef nightmare. Halvek whispered something that may have been prayer. Kalen planted his feet, brought the rifle up, centered the sight on the sensory cluster, and squeezed. Clack. For one offended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then orange smoke coughed from the rifle's venting ports. The internal coil had fused. Silver dust. Always the damn dust. Kalen bared his teeth.
Of course.
The stalker lunged. He dropped the useless rifle and tore the heavy combat knife from his hip in the same motion, stepping between the trench and the charging beast because there was nowhere else to step and no one else there to do it. The animal closed with horrifying speed, limbs scrambling, head low, claws biting sparks from the salt crust. Kalen set himself for impact. Then the shadows moved. Not the beast's shadow, another. A figure detached from the dark span between two fossil ribs and dropped soundlessly through the dying light, all lean lines and soot-dark cloth. For an instant the body seemed to hang sideways in the air, balanced on a geometry normal men did not use. Then it spun. Two curved blades flashed. No flourish, no wasted violence, just a single turning cut so clean it almost looked gentle. Wet sound followed. The newcomer landed in a crouch, one hand to the dust, the other two already clearing black ichor from the blades with a practiced flick. Behind him, the slag stalker took two more scrambling steps before its head slid free of its neck. The corpse collapsed in a convulsion of twitching limbs and steaming gore. Silence held the trench for a breath. Then Kalen let out the air in his lungs. He stared at the dead predator, then at the man crouched between him and the carcass. Silas rose without hurry. He was all hard economy, too thin at first glance, until one noticed how little of him was wasted. Dark silks and ash-stained wraps clung close to his frame, designed to mute movement rather than display it. The hood shadowed most of his face, but not enough to hide the pallor there, nor the long, exhausted sharpness of a man who looked born from places light forgot. In either hand he held a curved blade, narrow and black and whisper-thin, their edges catching only enough dusk to prove they existed. He did not look at the professor. He looked at Kalen.
Your aim is getting slow,
Silas said. His voice was low, rough, and almost conversational. Kalen glanced down at the smoking rifle by his boot.
The dust fused the coil. That sounds like the rifle's opinion.
Kalen gave a short, disbelieving bark of laughter, the kind that came only after almost being disassembled by local wildlife.
Ha! You were watching?
Silas slid one blade away beneath his wraps with a fluid, practiced motion, then the other.
Long enough. Shh, helpful bastard. Alive helpful.
Only then did Halvek seem to remember himself. He climbed awkwardly from the trench, still clutching the shard as if the universe might steal it back. His gaze flicked from the headless corpse to Silas and stayed there a little too long, not with fear alone, but with the troubled fascination scholars reserved for things that did not fit cleanly into their categories.
We must leave.
The professor said, breathless now.
At once.
Kalen bent, recovered the rifle, and looked at the ruined coil with open disgust.
That was the plan before your revelation acquired teeth.
Halvek ignored the remark. His eyes dropped to the shard in his hands.
Do you understand what this means? If the vein still carries heat after all this time, if it remains active in any meaningful sense, then the accepted model is wrong. Completely wrong. The bedrock is not inert.
Silas turned his head slightly, listening not to the man but to the dark beyond the ribs.
The crawl begins,
he said quietly. Kalen looked up at once. He knew what Silas meant. The predators changed patterns after light sink. One could be chance. More than one meant the flats were waking into their night hunger, and men standing around debating geology became carrion by principle. He jerked his head toward the transport half buried behind the western ridge.
Move!
The professor hesitated just long enough to make Kalen want to strike him with the dead rifle. Then Halvek clutched the shard to his chest and obeyed. They crossed the flats in gathering gloom, Professor stumbling and muttering over the prize in his hands, Kalen scanning with a rifle he no longer trusted, and Silas moving at the edge of vision where he seemed least substantial and most dangerous. The wind rose around the fossil ribs. Silver dust hissed over the crust. Somewhere far off in the deepening dark, another low tectonic groan rolled through the reach like something huge, adjusting its weight in sleep. By the time the transport coughed to life beneath them, the horizon had nearly swallowed eternal whole. Inside the cramped metal hull, the air smelled of old sweat, machine oil, ozone, and scrubber chemicals. Halvek sat forward on the bench, goggles off now, staring at the shard with manic wonder.
Don't you see?
He whispered.
The high houses tell us the world is dead. They tell us the foundations are spent. But if this line is still warm, if this structure is still conducting, then whatever the ancients built upon or into never truly ceased. It only slowed.
Kalen set the broken rifle across his knees and began prying open the coil housing with a field tool.
It is a tomb, Professor.
No,
Halvek said.
that is exactly the lie. A tomb is finished. This.
Is still dangerous.
Kalen cut in. Across from him, Silas sat with his hands folded, one curved hilt just visible beneath the soot-dark cloth. He had gone quiet again, almost erased by the low compartment light, but Kalen knew the set of his shoulders. He was listening, not to Halvek, to the ground. Kalen scraped fused residue from the rifle chamber and stared at the glowing shard reflected faintly in the transport wall. The professor might have found a vein. That did not yet mean he had found truth. But out on the flats, in the half hour of falling pressure and predator movement, with the smell of old ozone in the air and the dust trying to eat his weapon alive, Kalen had felt the world around that trench differently than he had before. Not alive, not that. But not entirely dead either. And he hated how little difference there seemed to be between those two conditions now. The White Vault. Far beneath the processional halls of Eternal, where noble feet passed over polished obsidian and never once considered what machinery bore them upward, the White Vault kept watch. It had no windows, it had no banners, it had no patience for spectacle. The chamber was buried deep within the administrative heart of the capital, sealed below the tiered grandeur of ministries, relay sanctums, judgment halls, census galleries, and the ironclad arteries through which the empire moved its will from spire to spire. Weight lived there. One felt it at once upon entering, the crushing, ancient burden of a city built in layers, each generation adding new stone to old necessity, each regime draping fresh law over older law like funerary cloth over a corpse that refused to rot. The air was cold and dry and faintly bitter with ozone, warmed brass, parchment dust, machine oil, and the sterile sting of recirculated atmosphere. Somewhere behind the pale walls, hidden engines ground without pause. Somewhere deeper still, lifts moved through sealed shafts with low mechanical groans that seemed to come not from the building, but from the bones of the world beneath it. The White Vault was not where the Empire announced itself. It was where the Empire thought. The chamber rose in vast concentric tiers of white stone and silver-veined alloy, severe as doctrine and nearly as merciless. Along the outer rings, silent assessors and relay clerks bent over data screens and brass-rimmed consoles that glimmered in corpse-pale light. Overhead, the domed ceiling vanished into a high, sanctified dimness ribbed with luminous channels through which streams of cold current moved in measured pulses like thought passing through the skull of some slumbering behemoth too large for any human prayer to name. No heraldry stained those walls, no red of vein, no blue of Solonia. No boast of lineage was permitted to survive inside that chamber. Neutrality had been made architectural there. And at the center of it stood Lady Sloane. She did not seem small, though everything around her had been built at a scale intended to humble. That, more than beauty or title, was one of the things men remembered about her. Not that she commanded a room by force of voice. She seldom raised it. Not that she dressed with ostentation. She never did. It was something colder than that. A quality of perfect proportion. A sense that she belonged precisely where the chamber's center had been designed to be. She stood before the central lectern with both hands lightly resting upon its black glass rim. Her garments were formal black, severe and immaculate, falling in uninterrupted lines that turned her into a vertical stroke of shadow against the pale geometry of the vault. At her collar and cuffs, only the thinnest tracery of silver marked office. No jewel gleamed at her throat. No house color touched her sleeves. Her dark hair was drawn back with exacting precision. Her face, pale in the tactical light, was not soft and not hard, but finished, the expression of a woman who had spent too many years looking at power from beneath to retain any fascination with its vanity. Before her, transparent panes hung in the air like ghostly tablets, transit grids, reserve tonnage reports, mercantile conflict assessments, private domestic routing requests from the highest bloodline quarters, atmospheric pressure yields from the outer bridge spines, military reserve distribution delays worded so politely they bordered on insult. She read all of them. That was her office. The High Lords believed they ruled because men obeyed their names. The Archons believed they ruled because fleets, contracts, and dynastic currents bent around their will. Both beliefs were useful. Neither was entirely true. Empires did not survive by decree alone. They survived because somewhere beneath the theater of command, there remained a mind capable of seeing all the separate movements at once: military, political, mercantile, domestic, ceremonial, and discerning where strain was gathering before strain became rupture. Lady Sloane was such a mind. That was why none of the houses owned her. That was why all of them tried. She moved one pane aside with 2 fingers. A lower canal delay. Nothing. Another. A red side reserve complaint disguised as urgency. Predictable. Another. A private domestic routing adjustment tied to one of the upper residential arcs. That one she kept open, though her expression did not alter. There was nothing overtly alarming in it. A shift in internal movement timing, reprioritized escorts, a sequence alteration in one of the protected lanes, small things, court things, the kind of thing lesser administrators learned to dismiss because noble households were always rearranging themselves according to insult, appetite, fear, or the weather. Lady Sloane never dismissed noble movement as trivial. She merely refused to call it important until it proved itself. A relay chime sounded, soft, amber-toned, not urgent, but irregular. Her eyes lifted, high above, suspended beneath the dome. The white vault's central tactical sphere was turning. It was a great pale globe of layered data light, vast as a sanctified moon, its surface alive with moving roots and flickering streams from every active channel the Empire considered worth measuring. Cargo arteries moved across it like luminous veins. Administrative corridors burned in thin gold lines. Watch stations, relay towers, pylon chains, transit spines, reserve routes, private schedules, field permits. Everything flowed there in measured procession, a cold and beautiful lie suggesting that the whole of state could be rendered into order if only one built a system elaborate enough to hold it. Lady Sloane knew better. Order was not what the sphere showed, only the attempt.
Expand,
she said. The globe obeyed. Light descended in concentric rings around the command circle, washing the white floor in pale tactical script. Sectors unfurled, timings aligned, priority markers surfaced from beneath the normal stream of traffic. Most were routine. Then she saw the hitch. It was minor, so minor another mind might have missed it. A hesitation in one eastern domestic route, a compensating delay in a reserve corridor 2 tiers below, a remote field authorization in the lower reach holding longer than its projected closure window. Not enough to flag alarm. Barely enough to irritate the lattice, but they were touching, not directly, not in any way a clerk could explain in a memo. Yet Sloane saw at once that the pattern was beginning to gather shape, a private movement, a military adjustment, a field irregularity, 3 notes too distant to form music and yet somehow already inclining toward the same chord. Her hands stilled on the black glass. The white vault breathed around her. At the far tiers, relay clerks continued their labor in murmuring silence, styluses ticking softly against glass. In the walls, hidden cogs and sealed pistons shifted with muted metallic complaints. A lift descended through the deep shaft beneath the chamber with a long iron sigh. The air smelled faintly sharper now, as if some unseen relay bank had warmed. Sloane narrowed her gaze on the tactical sphere. The field authorization came from a remote excavation corridor beyond the city's nearer industrial skirts. Nothing notable in its face value filing. A professorial permit, A minor escort allotment, a projected return window. Routine, yet the closure window had drifted. The domestic route adjustment sat behind private seals, its language ceremonially vague. Also routine. The reserve corridor delay was more interesting. Tiny, almost insultingly tiny. A minor hold in tonnage sequencing where no hold should have been necessary unless something else had quietly been granted passage first. Lady Sloane did not yet know what those things meant. But she knew with absolute clarity that they did not belong near one another by chance. That was her gift, not prophecy, not genius in the vulgar, courtly sense. She did not see the future. She saw pressure. She saw where systems began to lean before lesser minds admitted there was any weight upon them at all. A clerk descended from the second ring, carrying a narrow brass-edged relay slate in both hands.
My lady.
She did not look away from the sphere.
Speak.
A Blue Side inquiry requests corridor clarification on reserve delay.
Of course it does.
The clerk hesitated.
A Red Side inquiry has submitted the same request through marshal channels.
That brought the smallest shift to her expression.
How quickly?
The clerk swallowed.
Within 3 minutes of one another.
Interesting.
She had thought. Not because red and blue opposed one another. They did that by instinct, as lungs drew breath. Interesting because both had noticed the same subtle irregularity quickly enough to ask, yet neither had enough visibility to understand it, which meant the pressure sat in the seams between systems, which meant it belonged to her.
Set them to waiting,
said Lady Sloane.
For how long?
She looked at him then. He lowered his eyes at once.
for as long as it takes me to know whether they're asking the right question.
Yes, my lady.
He withdrew. Sloane turned back to the descending rings of light around her. She opened the remote permit. The field signatures resolved in pale script. A smaller site, peripheral. Nothing in its official wording suggested disaster. But the timing misalignment remained, and timing was often the first honest thing in a dishonest report. She opened the private route adjustment next. The seal took longer to part. When it did, she read the movement notation once, then again. No explanation, merely revised internal priority, escort reassignment, and the sort of clipped procedural phrasing used by serious people when they wished to move faster than etiquette preferred. Her eyes sharpened. Not fear, recognition. Something had occurred in the network. Not a public danger, not yet. No sirens, no breach law, no martial summons. The city above still moved in its endless grandeur, believing itself coherent. But beneath that pageantry, in the true organs of state, pressure had begun to gather. Something remote had forced a private lane to shift. Something private had touched a reserve corridor. Something unseen had made red and blue ask the same question at nearly the same hour. Lady Sloane placed her palm flat against the lectern. The black glass answered with cold through the glove.
Correlation basis,
she said. Script rose in pale columns beside the tactical sphere.
Low confidence, network dissonance, timing deviation / route priority. Displacement / non-standard, hold response. Consensus insufficient.
Low confidence, insufficient consensus. So be it. Consensus was merely the mechanism by which slower minds caught up. Sloane expanded the sectors manually. The sphere widened. Route lines thinned into hair-fine threads. Traffic densities shifted. A minor eastern route gleamed more brightly than before. The remote field marker pulsed once, only once. Yet it did so with an irregular cadence, as if the signal itself had reached the edge of language and chosen not to cross it. The hairs at the back of her neck rose, not from fear, from the old and disciplined instinct that had preserved her office through 3 succession crises, 2 trade collapses, and more house intrigues than she cared to count. The pattern was not political. That was the first true answer. The second arrived with less comfort. Whatever it was already large enough to touch more than one layer of the empire at once. Lady Sloane drew in one slow breath. The white vault suddenly seemed vaster than before, not because it had changed, but because the sphere above her had reminded her how thin even imperial certainty truly was. The High Lords sat in their fortified heights and believed themselves the operators of history. The Archons watched markets, fleets, and bloodlines with predatory brilliance and believed that was the shape of mastery. Yet here, in the buried mind of the capital, Lady Sloane could see what both of them habitually forgot. Power was not the same thing as awareness. However, awareness, once lost by even a few crucial minutes, became catastrophe. A new relay chime struck the chamber, different tone, sharper. The sound rang out beneath the dome like a tiny silver hammer on sanctified glass. One of the field markers brightened, not to red, not to alarm, but enough. Around the outer rings, several clerks paused without meaning to. Heads tilted, hands hovered over glass. Even the hidden engines in the walls seemed, for one impossible instant, to recede beneath the pressure of that tiny rising note. Lady Sloane did not move quickly. She moved exactly.
"Seal all noise below my threshold,"
she said. At once, half the panes in the air vanished. Petitions died. Levy complaints dissolved. Trade disputes collapsed into archive stack. The white vault's center became cleaner, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The field marker remained. The domestic shift remained. The reserve delay remained. 3 points. 3 distortions, 3 separate motions beginning, unmistakably now, to pull toward one another. This was no answer, not yet. It was the beginning of a question large enough to matter. In that instant, Lady Sloane ceased to be merely the hand that moved power. She became what she had always truly been, whether the houses admitted it or not, the first witness. The first mind high enough in the Empire to see the shape of the approaching fracture before the fracture had earned a name. She lifted her head toward the tactical sphere, pale light washing her face into something almost carved.
"Open restricted channels,"
she said. The white vault obeyed, and far above, in the towers, chambers, and iron-lit cathedrals of Eternal, the Empire went on breathing, unaware that one of its 3 truest custodians had just felt the first subtle tremor of the future moving through its veins. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the next video on screen to continue Empire of Ash and Seamlight.